So in this section, we'll look at some basic polygon modeling. Okay, so we're just going to look at the normal sort of box modeling approach that people take when they're modeling stuff. So let's do that. So the first thing to do is to go into edit mode. So the edit mode is the equivalent of creating an edit poly modifier. So if I created a box in Max and I wanted to work on this box, if I wanted to change the shape, I'd have to go into the modifier panel and I would have to add an edit poly modifier, which is right here. Okay, I mean, you can do this in Max from the graphite tools, and it won't create a modifier. It'll just make the object an edit poly. And then in Max you go vertex and face, a polygon, sorry, vertex, polygon, edge, and you've got the option to select borders as well, right? This object obviously doesn't have a border, so I can't select it, but you've got the option, right? So in Blender, what you need to do is you need to go up to this menu here and you go into edit mode. So when it drops into edit mode, that's when you have access to those things. So the first one here is the vertex select, right? You can pick vertices, right? Let's go with this move thing. Let's go to bounding box center, so it doesn't move from that point. So there you go. You can transform this vertex. You can go to the edge mode, right? And you can go to the face mode. And the cool thing in this, which you don't have in Max, is when you're transforming at a component level, it's actually giving you this information here, right? So you can move it to a certain level, right? So that's your basic edit poly modifier type function. So selecting those components is here at the top, or if you go back to object mode, if you hit the tab key and then you hit 1, that'll take you into the vertex. If you hit 2, it will take you to the edge. If you hit 3, it'll take it into the face, right? So that's pretty handy. So tab 1 is edge, tab 2 is no, tab 1 is vertex, my apologies, tab 2 is edge, and tab 3 is face. So let's talk about some basic poly modeling. So with anything, one of the really basic things that we all do is extrusions. So to extrude, I would say the shortcut, I've learned from the shortcuts from all the ones that I've done, is you hit the E key and it extrudes the face up. Okay, so if we go to mesh and extrude, right, you go to extrude faces along normals, and extrude individual faces. So you get extrude faces, right, mesh, extrude faces along normals. So it's always going to do that. Same functionality in Max is if I go to polygon mode and then I go up to the graphite tools and I hit shift and I do that, right? So it's giving me an amount I can extrude this by, right? It's giving me the option to extrude by group normals, by local normals, or by polygon, which is exactly the same as mesh, extrude faces along normals, and extrude individual faces, right? Same thing. So that's what your extrusions gives you. The next thing that I will talk about is the inset. Now these are tools that I use a lot when I'm modeling, so that's why I want to talk about them. The shortcut for the inset is I. So you hit I and it insets the face. If you go to mesh, now where is it? Mesh, 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 mesh. So let's try the face menu. Inset faces. So it's not like in the previous instance we went to the mesh menu to extrude the face. In this instance, it's under the face menu. Okay, so like I was saying to you, the challenge that I really felt with Blender was the UI and how everything's a little bit sort of well, at least to me it wasn't very intuitive, but there you go, that's where it is. Okay, so you can basically go in there and you can insert that face another time. You can hit E and extrude it up. Okay, so that's where that one is. So the other tool that we all use a lot is loops. So selecting loops and adding loops. So if I wanted to come into let's start with adding loops. Okay, so we're in edit mode. We'll go to the edge mode, and if I select an edge, now once again all these guys work in shortcuts, so remember these shortcuts. Control R is what adds a loop. If you hit Control R, it adds a loop right to the center. If you use your scroll mouse, it adds the number of loops. When you do that, right, you get a little attribute editor kind of thing, right? So you can change things after the fact. This goes with the extrude, it goes with the inset, it goes with all the other tools. So if I wanted to change this to 10, I can change that to 10, I can change that to 3. I can get them to be even. The clamped correct UVs, I don't know what that is. Fall off, I would assume, is the fall off between the loops, right? I could be wrong. I think I probably am wrong. If somebody can correct me, then that'd be great. The smoothness is, I think, to do with you know, how this tapers, but this is not something that I use personally, so I'm not going to play with it. So in Max, if we go to this edge, we go to the edge, okay, and I wanted to add loops, I would go to the insert menu here, right, and I do that, and I can do the same thing I did in Blender. I can increase it to 2. I can slide it with a level of precision, right? So I can move them up, I can move them down, I can increase the spacing, I can decrease the spacing by a very, very particular amount, by a very exact amount. Now Blender doesn't have that feature of changing the space between the loops. I can't, you know, I initially thought that it was something to do with fall off, but obviously it's not. You can increase the number of cuts, but I guess to change the spacing, you would probably need to do that manually. So we can come to that next. So say I wanted to change the spacing of these loops, and I've got to do it manually. So what you do is you select the edge, shortcut once again, right? Alt and select picks the loop, right? So if you do that and you went to select, and I would say here it is. Isn't that lucky? Select the edge loops. There you go, right? You can go select edge rings. Okay, you got a similar thing in Max where you can select the ring, right? So you got loops, and you got these. You got boundaries. You know, the boundary selection that you didn't have in sort of this menu here. Is you got the boundary here, right? So you could come into here. Okay. Interesting. So I guess that isn't it. So my apologies. But there is a way to select boundaries. I just need to look that up, and I'll come back to you guys on that. But that's sort of the basics of modeling with polys. So say I decided that I'd model the shape up. Another really important function with any modeling is the mirror function, right? So let's say we want to have this symmetrical. So I will go to the face menu and say I grab these faces here, and now here's an interesting one. When you want to delete stuff, so you selected this, the shortcut key is X. When you hit X, right, what it'll do is you can delete, but leave different elements in there. Delete faces. What you want to select so that you have the least amount of headaches possible is dissolve faces. When you dissolve faces, it gives you that, but it keeps the vertices. So you delete it, and you get delete faces, and you don't have any stray vertices. Okay. So X would delete and just leave a face. If you hit delete, it's going to delete, and you aren't going to have any stray vertices. So stray vertices would be, say, if I had a loop that was going from here to here, or say just doing something funky, and there was an extra loop, there was an extra vertex just hanging there for some reason, it wouldn't be there. So if I wanted to mirror this guy, right? One thing that I like when I'm mirroring is doing things non-destructively. So what you would do is you would go to the object mode. So I'm going to hit tab, right? I'm going to grab this guy. And one other little tip that I like is I like to have wireframe unshaded when I'm working, and you've got that in Max by default, right? Like if not by default maybe, but if I hit this and I hit F4, right? So go to edit poly and I hit F4, it gives me a wireframe unshaded view. That would be super handy when you're modeling. So with Blender you don't have it. So the way to actually set it up is to go into the object properties. So we'll look for the object properties. Where are the object properties? World properties, output properties, object properties. So we go to the viewport display and we select wireframe. Okay, so that gives you your familiar wireframe unshaded look, right? So if I wanted to mirror this object, if I come into here and I go to my move tool and I select this, the pivots at the center, if I mirror, this isn't going to, it's not like 3ds Max. So I'll show you what I mean. So if I grab this object, now the thing is, I hadn't talked about modifiers, and that's another topic, but there is a modifiers section here, just like in 3ds Max where you add modifiers. It is, here we go, right? So if I added a mirror modifier, okay, what it's going to do is it's going to use the central gizmo, right? It's going to merge the vertices, and the object moves as one, and you can't actually edit on the fly the mirror axis, right? What I mean is, if you go to Max, if I go to Max, I'll just maximize this for you, and I grab this guy, I go to the polygon and delete that, and then I come here to the edit poly mode, and then I throw in a mirror modifier. Okay, so when I go to the mirror modifier, obviously I want to do a copy, but the nice thing is you've got this gizmo here, right? So you can move the gizmo and you can set up how you want it to mirror, right? So we go Y, mirror on the Y, and you can select, and even if you didn't have the pivot right on the edge, like in this instance my pivot's in the middle, I can still kind of get the mirroring happening, and it's all good. So we're now going to mirror this object over. So as I'd said previously, because the pivot point, so I'm just going to leave this to the bounding box center. Okay, so because the pivot's sitting here, it isn't going to mirror things correctly. I want to mirror along this axis here, right? So as I'd said before, so if you add a mirror modifier like so, it's mirroring about this axis here, right? So we'll just get rid of that. So what you want to do is you want to select this object, you want to go to the cursor, you want to turn on snapping, and I've set mine to vertex snap, right? So what you do is you go pa pa pa, it snaps to that, and then what you need to do, I mean, you could obviously mirror things if now, right? But the thing is, I want the geometry, I want the origin of the geometry to be at this point, right? So what you do is you go object, set origin, and you go origin to 3D cursor. Okay, and then if I hit Shift C to move the 3D cursor back to 0, it's gone back to 0. If I select this object, whoops, if I hang on, Shift C, if I come and select the object, right, so I'm in object mode, and I hit space and I hit move, okay. So what you want to do, okay, so we're going to talk about mirroring. So what you would do is you would take the 3D cursor, snap it to vertex, and whoops, sorry, you take the 3D cursor and you snap it to there. Okay, so then what you want to do is you go object, set origin, origin to 3D cursor. Okay, so if I hit space and I hit W, no, space, and I go move, you can see the pivot points here, right? So what I want to do is I want to mirror it along the Z axis, right? So we get a modifier, I get a mirror, there you go, I mean along the X, so it's mirroring correctly now, right? So previously, if I go to the 3D cursor and I say Shift C, it goes back to 0, 0, 0, right? So I've mirrored this. So if I turn this off, it's sitting here, right? Now I don't know what happened there before. So the pivot's now set this way. So if I come here and I go global and I set the pivot to the bounding box center, median point, to grab this object, and I go object, set origin, if I go set origin to center of mass, for example, which is where it probably was, right? And then I turn on this mirror modifier, you get this funkiness, right? It's not mirroring properly. So what you want to do, as I said before, is you grab the 3D cursor, snapping's on, snap it to a vertex, right? You go to object, set origin to the 3D cursor, okay? And then if we turn on the mirror modifier, it's mirroring correctly. So that's how you sort of move the pivot in order to mirror objects. And once it's mirrored, if we go into edit mode, we hit tab 1, for example, and we pick this guy, it affects both sides. So that's similar to what we have in Max in terms of the mirroring, right? The only thing is you can't move the gizmo interactively in Blender. So that completes mirroring. The other thing that you can do is, I mean, the other important thing when you're modeling is you wanna have, like in Max, excuse me, in Max you have the turbo smooth modifier, right, which tells you how things would look, and you can add edges and yada yada and things like that. So with this if you go to the modifier stack, you have something called a subdivision modifier in here. Let's see, generate subdivision surface, right? So that's the equivalent. And then if you wanted to harden up these edges, you would go in and add edges here, and it would raise things up. So that's the basics of starting up with Blender in the context of 3ds Max, and a basic look at all the tools. And I'm not an expert, I don't claim to be an expert, I'm still learning this software. What I'd recommend is that there's a lot of good tutorials from a lot of very, very good Blender modelers. Is once you get the basic hang of, you know, where things are in the UI, what does the functions that you need to do, like for modeling, for example, you need to know how to, you know, extrude, inset, create loops, select loops, add loops, remove loops, cut surfaces. I haven't gone into cut, I haven't gone into all that kind of stuff. But with any 3D software, if you've used Max or you've used Maya, the functionality or the functions that you're using from one software to another are the same. All you need to learn is where to find them and what the best workflow to do that is within your native software that you're working in. So with Blender, like I said, shortcuts are a big thing. I mean, the UI is not as intuitive as I would personally like. So I hope this helped you, please take what you find valuable and leave behind what does not give you any value. This is just my humble effort to give people a little shortcut where I had to spend a month or a few weeks just familiarizing myself with all this stuff. Maybe you can do so in a matter of 20 or 30 minutes. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.